Before the first bomb fell on Baghdad, before the world watched a nation burn live on CNN, there was a secret that changed American foreign policy forever. Why did the U.S. really invade Iraq? Was it weapons of mass destruction, revenge, oil, or something far deeper? This is a story that shaped the entire Middle East, cost trillions of dollars, and left scars that still define global politics today. And as you'll see, nothing happened the way you think it did. After the end of the Cold War, America believed it had entered a new era, a world where the United States stood alone as a single global superpower. But the Middle East was changing rapidly. Tensions, old rivalries, collapsing governments, and rising extremism set the stage for one of the most controversial decisions in modern American history, the invasion of Iraq. To understand why the U.S. went to war, we must go back a decade before 2003, to the first Gulf War. After Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in 1990, America led a global coalition to drive him out. But President George H.W. Bush made a strategic decision. He stopped the war before overthrowing Saddam's government. Many believe this single choice shaped everything that would follow. Through the 1990s, Iraq lived under strict UN sanctions. Saddam defied inspectors, blocked access to military sites, and intentionally created confusion about whether he possessed chemical or biological weapons. He wanted to appear strong to neighboring countries, but in doing so, he unknowingly gave the U.S. exactly the reason they needed to justify war later. When the World Trade Center fell in 2001, America changed overnight. Fear, anger, and shock pushed the government into a mindset of preemptive defense. Al-Qaeda was the first target, but in Washington, powerful advisors believed Iraq was next. They argued that Saddam could give weapons to terrorists, even if no evidence existed. Inside the White House, a narrative was forming. If America didn't strike first, Iraq would strike eventually. This wasn't just about weapons. It was about reshaping the Middle East. Some officials believed removing Saddam would spread democracy across the region. Others saw Iraq's massive oil reserves as too important to leave in the hands of a dictator. And some saw the war as a chance to finish what 1991 started. The American public, still traumatized by September 11th, was shown images of mushroom clouds, mobile weapons labs, and satellite photos of suspicious military sites. Most turned out to be incorrect or exaggerated, but at the time, they were enough to convince millions that war was necessary. By early 2003, diplomacy had failed. UN inspectors asked for more time. France and Germany opposed invasion, but the U.S. and the U.K. were done waiting. The world watched as President George W. Bush announced that coalition forces were preparing to attack Iraq. What happened next would reshape not only the Middle East, but America's identity itself. The world didn't wake up one random morning to the Iraq War. The tension had been building, slowly, quietly, and dangerously, for more than a decade. But by early 2003, it felt like the fuse had already been lit, and everyone was just waiting for the explosion. After the 9/11 attacks, America wasn't looking at threats the same way anymore. The country was hurt, angry, and determined to crush any danger before it could grow. Inside the White House, Iraq suddenly became more than a distant dictatorship. Saddam Hussein was now seen as a potential architect of the next big attack. Whether that fear was justified or built on assumptions, that debate still continues today. But back then, emotions were high. Intelligence agencies around the world were scrambling to collect information. And soon, one idea pushed everything into motion. Iraq might have weapons of mass destruction, WMDs. It was a terrifying claim. Chemical weapons, biological weapons, hidden facilities, mobile labs, long-range missiles. And Saddam? He refused to cooperate fully with UN inspectors. To some, this looked like guilt. To others, it looked like a man trying to protect his pride and sovereignty. But for the American public, one line changed everything. We don't want the smoking gun to be a mushroom cloud. That single sentence shaped the fear of an entire nation. While the U.S. was building its case, Saddam Hussein appeared confident, even arrogant. Instead of de-escalating tensions, he played political chess like he always had, by confusing everyone. One day he allowed UN inspectors in. The next day he limited their access. One week he denied everything, and the next week he hinted at capabilities he never proved. Was he bluffing? Was he hiding something? Or was he trying to look strong in front of Iran, his longtime enemy? Nobody knew. Meanwhile, the U.S. military was quietly preparing. Troops were being moved, bases strengthened, and equipment shipped to the Middle East. Inside briefing rooms, generals warned that Saddam's regime wouldn't collapse easily. This wouldn't be a quick strike. It would be a massive war. In Washington, the debate reached its boiling point. President George W. Bush argued that waiting was a mistake, that America could not risk another surprise attack. Britain stood with the U.S., while countries like France and Germany strongly disagreed. At the United Nations, arguments became so heated that diplomats still talk about those moments as some of the most intense political battles ever seen. But the world outside didn't know the full picture. Ordinary Americans were watching news channels showing satellite images of suspected chemical factories, intercepted communications, and secret bunkers. Whether those images were correct or misinterpreted didn't matter. People were scared, and fear moves nations. Then came the moment that sealed Iraq's fate. On March 17, 2003, President Bush issued an ultimatum. Saddam Hussein had 48 hours to leave Iraq. Otherwise, war was coming. Around the world, millions watched in silence. Some believed America was doing the right thing. Others believed this was the beginning of a disaster. But for Iraqis, the feeling was different. Many were terrified. Some hoped the war would free them from Saddam's tyranny. Others feared their entire country would collapse. And in those final hours, Saddam Hussein chose his answer. He stayed. That single decision didn't just trigger a war. It changed the Middle East forever. On the night of March 20th, 2003, the world watched in disbelief. Baghdad, one of the oldest cities on earth, was about to witness something no Middle Eastern capital had ever seen before. The U.S. military called it shock and awe. Iraqis simply called it the night the sky exploded. For weeks, American forces had been positioning themselves in Kuwait, Qatar, and on aircraft carriers floating silently in the Persian Gulf. The plan wasn't just to win the war. It was to win it fast, using the full force of American technology, precision missiles, and psychological dominance. The message was clear. Saddam's regime would collapse before it even understood what hit it. At exactly 5:34 a.m. Baghdad time, the first wave of cruise missiles roared across the sky. They were aimed not at civilians, not at random buildings, but at the very heart of Saddam Hussein's power. Command centers, military headquarters, communication hubs, air defense sites, and government compounds. Reporters stationed on rooftops could feel the ground vibrating beneath their feet. Entire neighborhoods flickered, as if someone had turned the lights of the city on and off. The explosions echoed like rolling thunder, shaking windows miles away. One journalist said, "It felt like the sky was being peeled open." Within minutes, 40 Tomahawk missiles followed, then dozens more. Each missile cost more than a luxury car, and hundreds of them were launched in a single night. Inside Baghdad, Iraqi soldiers were overwhelmed. Anti-aircraft guns fired helplessly into empty air, trying to hit jets flying too high to see. Communication systems went dead. Troops received orders they couldn't confirm. Rumors spread like wildfire. The Americans are already inside the city. The bridges are gone. The palace has been hit. But the truth was even more alarming for Saddam's forces. U.S. Special Operations teams had been inside Iraq before the war even officially began, marking targets, tracking Iraqi commanders, and disabling key defenses. The war wasn't just coming from the sky. It was closing in from every direction. Meanwhile, on the ground in southern Iraq, American and British troops crossed the Kuwaiti border. The desert filled with convoys stretching farther than the eye could see. Abrams tanks, Humvees, armored vehicles, supply trucks, all advancing relentlessly toward Baghdad. The biggest surprise was how quickly Iraqi resistance crumbled. Many soldiers surrendered immediately. Some abandoned their posts and walked home. Entire units threw down their weapons and hid in civilian clothes. The Iraqi military wasn't just losing, it was disintegrating. But not everyone gave up. Fedayeen fighters, Saddam's most loyal and ruthless forces, launched ambushes, attacked supply lines, and fought street to street in cities like Basra and Nasiriyah. They used guerrilla tactics, fake checkpoints, and even civilian shields. American troops, expecting a conventional battle, realized the war would be more complicated than predicted. Back in Baghdad, Saddam Hussein tried to project strength. State TV broadcast videos of him, surrounded by supporters, promising victory. But even those broadcasts were unreliable. No one knew if they were live, recorded, or staged. Rumors claimed he had already gone into hiding. Then came the moment that defined the invasion. On April 3rd, only 2 weeks after the war began, U.S. forces reached the outskirts of Baghdad. Generals expected fierce resistance, maybe even urban warfare that could last months. Instead, something unexpected happened. Iraqi defenses collapsed almost overnight. As American tanks rolled through the city, citizens emerged cautiously. Some cheered, some stared in silence, some wept. The war wasn't over. Not by a long shot, but a regime that ruled Iraq with fear for 24 years was falling apart. And the world realized something chilling. Winning the war was easy. Winning the peace, that would be the real battle. On April 9th, 2003, Baghdad woke up to silence that felt unnatural. No anti-aircraft fire. No rumble of explosions. No roar of Iraqi armored vehicles. The sky was strangely clear. And for the first time in weeks, birds could be heard over the city. It was a silence that comes right before history changes forever. American tanks had already entered Baghdad through the west. The Republican Guard, the elite shield of Saddam's regime, had collapsed far faster than anyone expected. Their bases were empty, their checkpoints abandoned. Their commanders had either fled or disappeared. But the fall of Baghdad wasn't marked by a military announcement or speech. It was marked by an image that the world would never forget. At Ferdo Square, a crowd of Iraqis surrounded a giant statue of Saddam Hussein, standing tall, arm raised, cast in bronze, symbolizing 2 decades of dictatorship. People threw shoes at it, beat it with sticks, climbed it with ropes, but it wouldn't fall. Then a U.S. Marine recovery vehicle pulled up. Soldiers threw a massive chain around Saddam's neck, and with the pull of hydraulic power, the statue began to crack, tilt, and collapse. When it hit the ground, the dust cloud rose like a ghost escaping. Iraqis cheered. Some climbed the fallen statue, hitting it with sandals, a sign of ultimate disrespect in Arab culture. Western media declared the war practically over. It looked like a clean victory. But the moment the statue fell, something else fell with it. Iraq's entire government structure, its police force, its military, its security system. Almost overnight, a nation of 25 million people was left with no functioning institutions. Ministries were empty. Police stations were deserted. Banks and museums were unprotected. And before anyone could react, chaos swept across the city. Looters stormed government buildings, homes, stores, and even hospitals. People dragged furniture, computers, cables, even doors, into the streets. There was no one to stop them. No army, no police, no authority. Baghdad wasn't celebrating anymore. It was unraveling. For American soldiers, the mission suddenly changed. They weren't just warriors now. They were peacekeepers, security guards, and disaster managers all at once. These troops expected to fight a conventional war. Instead, they found themselves facing a completely different enemy, the breakdown of an entire society. U.S. commanders radioed urgent messages back home. We need more troops. We need stabilization forces. We're losing control of the streets. But reinforcements were slow. Strategic plans had assumed the Iraqis would rebuild their own institutions quickly, but without leadership, resources, or stability, rebuilding felt impossible. Then came a decision that would change Iraq's future forever: the disbanding of the Iraqi military. Coalition authorities ordered that Saddam's army, hundreds of thousands of trained soldiers, was officially dissolved. Overnight, these men lost their jobs, salaries, and purpose. Many went home angry, humiliated, and desperate. Some would later join militias. Some would join insurgent groups. Some would form what the world would soon call the Iraqi resistance. And in the middle of this rising chaos, Baghdad tried to return to normal life. Markets reopened. Children played in the streets. Families cooked meals again. But the feeling was eerie, like the calm before a storm. Because a new enemy was on the horizon. Not a foreign army, not a dictator, but a shadowy force growing quietly inside the ruins of Iraq. A force that would turn the end of the Iraq War into the beginning of one of the deadliest insurgencies of the 21st century. The fall of Baghdad should have been the end. But instead, it became the opening chapter of something far darker. As the dust settled over the ruined city, a new enemy began to form. Not in palaces or military bases, but in safe houses, abandoned neighborhoods, and the outskirts of Iraq's broken cities. These weren't foreign armies. They were Iraqis, former soldiers, angry civilians, religious extremists, tribal fighters, and foreign jihadists drawn in by chaos. This was the birth of the Iraqi insurgency. And unlike the conventional battles America had won in weeks, this war would drag on for years. Insurgents understood something the U.S. military hadn't expected. They didn't need tanks. They didn't need jets. They only needed time and anger. Improvised explosive devices, IEDs, became their weapon of choice. A single bomb buried in the dirt could destroy a $1 million armored vehicle. Convoys that once moved confidently down highways now crawled through cities at walking speed. Soldiers began checking the roads not for enemies, but for anything suspicious. A soda can, a cardboard box, a pile of rocks. Every object became a threat. U.S. troops who had trained for tank battles and firefights now faced invisible enemies. Snipers hid in rooftops. Car bombs exploded in markets. Suicide attackers targeted police lines. Each victory on the battlefield was overshadowed by the feeling that the enemy could strike anywhere, anytime. America had won the war, but was now losing the peace. Without a functioning government, old tensions, muted under Saddam's iron-fisted rule, erupted to the surface. Shia versus Sunni, militia versus militia, tribe versus tribe. Neighborhoods divided, families fled, entire districts transformed into war zones almost overnight. And in the middle of it all, American soldiers were forced to act as referees in a game with no rules. Then came one of the most explosive moments of the entire conflict, the bombing of the Al-Asqari Mosque in Samarra, one of the holiest Shia sites in the world. The Golden Dome collapsed in flames, and within hours Iraq descended into full-scale sectarian civil war. Checkpoints sprang up everywhere. Militias kidnapped rivals in broad daylight. Bodies appeared each morning on the streets. Suddenly, Iraq wasn't just unstable. It was tearing itself apart. By end 2007, Washington finally made a drastic decision, sending over 20,000 additional U.S. troops. It became known as the Surge. These forces entered the most dangerous neighborhoods in Baghdad, Fallujah, Ramadi, and Mosul, places other units had avoided for years. They lived among the people, patrolled streets day and night, and partnered with local tribes fed up with extremist violence. Slowly, painfully, the violence began to drop, but by the time Iraq stabilized, the war had already left deep scars. For American families, the cost was devastating. Thousands of U.S. soldiers never returned home. Tens of thousands came back with life-changing injuries, physical and invisible. The financial cost? Over $2 trillion. A number so massive it doesn't even feel real. For Iraqis, the human toll was even heavier. Destroyed cities, lost families, a generation raised on fear instead of childhood. And then there was the political cost. The power vacuum created during the war opened the door years later for a new monster, ISIS, born from the remnants of insurgent groups America once fought. 2 decades later, the Iraq War remains one of the most debated conflicts in U.S. history. Ask 10 Americans what the war achieved, and you'll hear 10 different answers. Some say it removed a brutal dictator. Some say it destabilized the entire Middle East. Some believe it was necessary. Others believe it was the biggest mistake of the century. But one truth remains. The Iraq War changed America. It reshaped its military strategies. It reshaped its foreign policy. It reshaped how Americans feel about war, government, and truth. And for Iraq, the echoes of that war still shape its present. The bombs have stopped. The troops have gone home. But the story of the Iraq War is far from over, because its legacy lives on. in the lessons learned, the mistakes acknowledged, and the generations forever marked by the decisions made in 2003. If you stayed with me through this chapter of war and history, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who appreciates real military insight. Your support helps keep these deep dive documentaries alive. And I want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What part of this conflict surprised you the most? I read every single comment, and your voice helps shape future episodes. Thank you for watching.